So hello everyone, we are here with Dr. Oliver Comar. This video is for doing our interview about the topic biodiversity. So first, Dr. Comar, thanks for being with us. This is an interview is about the topic biodiversity. So I'm gonna ask you some questions. So
Okay, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
thank. The first question is, what does biodiversity mean for you?
What does biodiversity mean for me? Okay, well, biodiversity, usually I think of it as all of the flora and fauna, like the combination of all the different species around us, including the plants, the birds, the insects, even the microbes, microbes, the bacteria and the little tiny animals that we can't see, animals or species that we can't see. But biodiversity is even more than just the species. It's also the different ecosystems, which is the kind of the communities of species. There's actually a lot of species inside you and inside me, which is biodiversity as well. So it turns out there's more than 500 species that live inside of me and you. So we're surrounded by species and kind of communities. So biodiversity is all these relationships among the ecosystems and the species. It's also the different the genes inside of each individual and the different kind of designs, natural designs that the genes are predicting.
Okay. And you think that one aspect of biodiversity is more important than other?
Is one aspect more important than another? Well, probably not. You know, it's all important, right? It's all important. But certainly I think the more diversity there is, the better for everybody. Because, well, we've seen this if you study biodiversity, you discover that communities that are very diverse, meaning they have a lot of species, tend to be better able to withstand environmental change or disasters, natural disasters or climate change. Everything kind of just seems to be more consistent when we have a lot of diversity. If you have a very disturbed habitat, the diversity is very low. There's only a few species, and things can get really strange. You know, you can have like outbreaks of plagas. What do we call the pests? Pest outbreaks, and then it's hard to predict what's going to happen. So that's why we have so much trouble with agriculture. People in agriculture, they've made a big mistake. They've removed all the biodiversity, almost all of it. And they try to manipulate all the conditions and plant just one species of grain, for example. But then what happens is it's hard for them to predict what's going to happen. And periodically there are pest outbreaks. And then they have to do all this manipulation by adding chemicals and treating their plots and hoping that they can destroy the biodiversity that came in. So if they had just left it all diverse to begin with, the way our ancient ancestors did, they probably could have found ways to increase productivity and have enough food for everybody without kind of destroying the ecosystems.
Okay, so the second question is, how has biodiversity changed on Zamorano campus? What does this change depend?
Okay, so I've been here for 6 years. What has changed in the last 6 years? Well, I've seen a few species become more common and some species become more rare. For example, we used to have more certain kinds of water birds in the lagoons that have just disappeared, like the grebes and the gallinules. They're birds that lived in the water, and I can't really explain why they disappeared, but they did. So things are not stable. Last year, suddenly a different kind of bird appeared and began to nest. I'm talking about the storks. Storks, in Spanish it would be cigüeñas. De repente, all of a sudden, we had a nesting colony of wood storks down by aquaculture. That was a big change. This year they're not there anymore, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure why they're not there. Maybe next year they will be back again. The reason I think they'll come back is because the colony was successful. Every nest produced babies. And so it wasn't as if the colony failed and so they decided not to keep coming. But they produced all their babies and they left. We'll see if they come back. Other changes, there are fewer skunks and agoutis, I think, today than there were 5 years ago. Some people say it's because there was a population explosion of feral cats on campus, and it could well be. Also, we had coyotes appear last year. For 5 years, there were no coyotes. I used to ask people, are there any coyotes here? No one had ever seen coyotes. But then suddenly I started hearing the coyotes howling around my house, and other people have told me where they think the coyotes have lived, and it seems like there's 2 or 3 bands of coyotes. They were here last year, but again, a few months have gone by and I haven't seen them. So things change. Things change. Go ahead. What's your next question?
I have a question for this question. You think that climate change is affect the biodiversity?
That's a very good question, because we talk about that all the time in, for example, in the Environment and Development Department. And we hear about climate change on television a lot. We've seen just recently how the hurricane season this year is much stronger than in other years, and it's because, well, the earthquakes I'm sure have nothing to do with climate change. But the hurricanes are more intense and stronger this year than normal, and it's because the temperature of the ocean water is higher than normal. But the temperature of the ocean water is related to climate change, because you can look at temperature patterns and see that the oceans are getting warmer every year, and that's because of global warming. So I believe that the more intense hurricanes in the Caribbean and the Atlantic is because of climate change. But what changes are there here at Zamorano that are due to climate change? And that I'm not so sure. I think it's possible that we've had more intense rainstorms, but I haven't actually seen any changes that I can say are due to climate change here on campus.
Okay, thanks. So the third question is, what do you think about biodiversity of Zamorano?
That's a good question. I'll tell you, I think it's really cool, and there's a lot of diversity here. There's so much diversity that I've been here for 6 years and I keep seeing new things. And I go out looking every week. Well, almost every week I go for a hike around the campus on the nature trail, the Eco Sendero, the nature trail. And I keep finding new things, including new species of birds that show up from time to time, or new mammals like the coyotes that came on campus last year. I know that Zamorano is in the middle of a very large region that is famous for having high levels of biodiversity. So it's called a hotspot for biodiversity here in Mesoamerica. So this is a great place for people interested in biodiversity.
So, okay, the last question is, how many species of the birds are there in Zamorano, and what are the most important?
Of birds, okay. Well, here on campus, I remember the list is up to 268 species. 268 species here on campus. Meaning, you can walk out from your dormitory, in the area where you can walk, you can find 268 species. If you keep looking, you won't see them all in one day. The most I've seen in one day is 107, I think, or 109. If we go into Oyuca or up to the pine forest of Santa Ynez, the number of species increases to 350. So there's a lot of species of birds. Now, what are the most important, you say? Depends on how you define important. Important for agriculture, important for conservation, important for ecological services or ecosystem services, or important for ecotourism in terms of being attractive to tourists. How do you define important?
I think that important in the aspect of what important of agriculture.
Agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture.
Okay. Well, certainly there are a lot of birds on campus that eat insects. One of the most common birds, one of the largest families of birds with the most number of species on campus are the flycatchers, and they eat flies. Imagine how we would be if we didn't have flycatchers. There'd be lots more flies around. So that's one important group of birds. Another very important group of birds are the carrion eaters, like the black vultures, the turkey vultures, and the crested caracaras. They, every time there's a dead animal, they come down and eat it. If they can get there before the ants have eaten the dead animal. So it's these species that help remove kind of trash or dead things are very important, because without them we'd have an accumulation of carcasses all over the place, and there'd be more diseases and things like that. So I think from an agricultural point of view, it's the animals that eat the dead things and the flycatchers.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Oliver Comer, and that's our interview. Thanks.
Okay, well, you're welcome.